Who invented found footage film? Well, if we're going to figure this out, why not start by talking to your favorite found footage know-it-all, Chris Vanderkay. Thanks for coming back to the channel. This has been something of an interesting conversation for me for a long time. Obviously, I'm a found footage fanatic, and I like to know about the history and context of the genre that I love so much. So I want to talk a little bit about it today, because here's something interesting about film. It has existed since the mid 1890s, right? Let's say 1895. It's 2025 now. So we're talking about 130 years that film has existed. And for most of that time, no one has known anything about found footage and fake documentary films. Most people came to know of found footage from the Blair Witch Project in 1998, 99. There were some found footage, some fake documentary films before that. This is Spinal Tap and things like that. But by and large, it was very recently in the history of films that anybody discovered it. You might not know this, but actually found footage and fake documentary, that is the youngest genre in existence. And not just in film, but in most mediums. That is the genre. Almost everything else existed before that: science fiction, drama, comedy, right? So found footage and fake documentary are the newest genre that's ever been invented. And it's the only one that's been invented since film was created, because most of those other genres, they existed in literature and in stage plays before movies ever existed. So it's really one of the only genres that exists in the lifetime of movies. So that's pretty cool. So, but who invented it? Obviously, a lot of us have seen the Blair Witch Project, and that might have been the place we first heard about it, but that wasn't the first one, right? We know that. We know a few years before that, in the 90s, there was Ghostwatch, which was done like a BBC haunted live special, which is more fake documentary than it is found footage. But you're going to notice as we talk about that there's a lot of connective tissue between fake documentary and found footage. In fact, it should be pointed out, the Blair Witch Project was originally not going to be just a found footage film. It was going to be a fake documentary film that had found footage elements in it. They were going to show footage of what happened to those people, but all of the documentary footage ended up in the special Curse of the Blair Witch that popped up on the Sci-Fi Channel. But that just illustrates the point of fake documentary, the idea of creating a fictional story that has the framing of a non-fictional, i.e. happening in the real world circumstance, right? So fake documentary and found footage are both of those. You go back even earlier than the one we just talked about, Ghostwatch or Blair Witch. You can go back to Without Warning, which was a fake newscast from the 80s that was kind of sci-fi-ish. It was about asteroids hitting the planet and how the news would be covering it. And then, of course, you can go all the way back to the very notorious film Cannibal Holocaust from the 70s, which is about some people that go off looking for a film crew that went to explore a cannibal tribe and then disappeared. They find the footage, and then it's the watching of the footage that tells them what happened to these people. So that's literal found footage in that movie. Now, the reason that I say that is not the invention of found footage, that movie, is because it's a film that's not even entirely found footage. At least half of the movie, if not more, is shot traditional narrative style and is made as a traditional narrative film, and it has a big section that is found footage. But again, that's not the first time that it was done. There were other, in fact, there were fake music documentaries, right? There was the Roodles, which was a parody of the Beatles that Eric Idle did. In fact, Hard Day's Night is kind of a fake documentary about the Beatles. So there were a lot of fake documentaries that were happening in the late 60s, early 70s that did beat Cannibal Holocaust to the screen to portray something that looks like it was nonfiction, even though it was entirely fictional. But that's not where it was born. You can go way back, and in fact, some big names were involved in the invention of fake documentary, found footage style stuff. You can go all the way back to Citizen Kane, in fact. Orson Welles' most famous film, one of the most popular and well-received and critically acclaimed films of all time. The movie opens with an extended newsreel about this character, Charles Foster Kane, who passed away. And it's all this newsreel footage of this man who lived a very big public life, and all the footage that we get to learn. It's basically an exposition sequence in, several minutes of the opening of the film. That's a fake documentary. However, he sort of used it as more of a, I don't want to say a satire, but what he was doing was borrowing the language of the day to be able to open a movie that was, for the rest of the movie, a standard narrative. Now, there was another very well-known filmmaker, a surrealist filmmaker named Luis Buñuel, who did make a short film, about a 30-minute film called Land Without Bread, or Las Herdes, Land Without Bread, depending on where you find the title. But that one it's shot like a traditional documentary, sort of like a travelogue, like visiting this exotic place that no one's ever been to. But what it's about is about this community that doesn't have any food, and they're honestly like starving. But the thing that makes this one not quite the birth of found footage and fake documentary is that it's just a satire. Even though it is the whole thing is shot in that style. It's really only making fun of one specific thing, which is these like travelogue type movies. They used to exist. This was back in the 30s. People didn't travel as much. They weren't as worldly. So documentary crews would go to places, record stuff, and then they would do this like overly dramatic narration about the footage that they shot there and make it seem, so exotic and different. And the point that the filmmaker was making, Buñuel, with this film, Land Without Bread, was you can do this with anything. And he did it by shooting what seemed like regular documentary footage, but then creating this outlandish voiceover narrative that goes along with it, right? So technically, yes, it is one of the places where the birth of found footage and fake documentary came from. But there was a generation in the 60s that really embraced fake documentary filmmaking. Peter Watkins is actually one of the pioneers of fake documentary filmmaking. If you recognize the name, it's probably because of his film Punishment Park, which is came out in the early 70s, and it's a really incredible political film. I won't go into it because I want to do an entire video talking about his career, because he honestly was the biggest, I believe, the biggest groundbreaker in found footage and fake documentary. In fact, there's one big fact about him I'll share in another video that most people don't even know. That's amazing. But he was not the first person to do an entire film filmed like a fake documentary. He started making them in the mid to late 60s, but there was a woman in 1962-63 that directed an entire feature film that was shot like a fake documentary. The film was The Connection, and the director was Shirley Clarke. And the reason why this film is significant is Shirley Clarke was known as sort of like an indie avant-garde filmmaker. She had never made anything that was fake documentary or found footage because nobody really had. But what happened was she decided she wanted to make an adaptation of a stage play called The Connection. So this was a script that existed. It was a scripted story, and it was about a bunch of jazz musicians and heroin addicts that were basically just hanging around in this apartment waiting for their heroin connection to show up so that they could get high. And there was a documentarian with a camera who was there interviewing and getting to know these people and what goes on in their world. That's the stage play, right? So those were characters that were in this play. Well, when she decided she wanted to translate it into a movie, she thought, well, you know what would be interesting and a way to keep it low budget is what if the film was shot from the point of view of the documentarian, of the camera person that's in the story. So instead of just having it be another character and shoot it traditional narrative style, she shot it through the lens of the camera the character in the story had. And so for the very first time in film history, the movie The Connection by Shirley Clarke tells an entire feature-length movie told through the eye of a camera that exists within the story. So becoming a fake documentary, but a fully scripted fictional story that just looks like a non-fiction story. And so that's why so honestly, Shirley Clarke is technically the inventor of the found footage movie, the fake documentary film. Other people have little pieces, and like I said, big names, Orson Welles, Luis Buñuel, but it was this woman, this groundbreaking, independent, avant-garde filmmaker, Shirley Clarke, that deserves the credit for having invented the genre that we love so much, the thing that led to Cannibal, Holocaust, and the Blair Witch Project, and Paranormal Activity, Bad Ben. All of these movies owe an enormous debt of gratitude to this woman, Shirley Clarke, who was the first visionary to ever think, what if we told a fictional story, but we made it look the way that documentaries have looked since the birth of film. And it created an entire genre, the very first genre ever invented for film. So a lot of credit to Shirley Clarke. If you can find it, go out. There's several places where you can rent it. It might even be free streaming. And it's very different from a lot of the films you'll see because it is a drama. It's not a horror film. It's not a science fiction film. It's a drama. But I think it's worth, if you really love this genre, it's worth seeing the birthplace of it. Where did it come from and what can you learn from it? So especially if you're a filmmaker or a film fan of any kind that loves found footage, definitely go check it out.